This is another in the series of videos about safety in motion, and I'm here with Lucy from Ward 1, our psychiatric intensive care unit, and Harriet from our psychiatric decision unit, which is Lotus. And we've been discussing restrictive practice and good practice around reducing the use of blanket restrictions, and actually Lucy was just telling me some instances of how it's been applied on Ward 1 and some learning from other areas. So I don't know if Lucy, you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the first kind of thing that came up, we had the chance to go to a conference looking at rapid tranquilisation on PQ units across the country, and part of that was looking at alternative strategies to rapid tranquilisation. One of the Gloucestershire Mental Health Trusts has managed to reduce the need for seclusion over the past year by implementing more activity coordinators, having a 7-day-a-week activity programme, kind of long-running photography projects and football leagues and all sorts of things like that, and that has meant that actually they have not had to nurse a patient in seclusion since September last year.
The discussion about activity coordinators and providing a really comprehensive set of distractions, if we want to call it that, on the wards is a really positive thing. We also had a bit of a conversation earlier about the use of or abuse of blanket restrictions or needless blanket restrictions. I think you were saying some things about mobile phones or takeaway food and so on.
Yeah, so mobile phones is up for discussion at the moment, and there are other PQs that do allow patients their smartphones, and we have been saying that no devices with cameras or no devices with internet connections, but that has caused a lot of upset with the patients. It's very, very difficult. We've tried to get round it by, we've got a patient payphone, but that gets damaged sometimes when people are angry. We've tried trialling ward mobile phones with basic Nokias, where people can put their SIM cards in so they can call and text, but they can't have access to the internet and Facebook. And they've worked to an extent, but not enough for us not to be able to but I don't think for us to not try the next step. And actually, that blanket restriction, if we're risk assessing each patient, there are going to be patients that come in at the point of admission that we could risk assess and say, well, it's not suitable for them to have their mobile phone. But certainly once a patient gets well and moves towards the transfer list and moves towards an acute ward, there's no reason in my mind why we can't say these are the boundaries.
In Safety in Motion, month 1 was about establishing mutual expectations and the compact, and having that conversation with service users about what can they expect in terms of rights and responsibilities and permissions and non-permissions. Are those conversations happening on both your wards?
I think so. So when we introduced the Nokia phones, obviously we couldn't bar things like 999 calls and stuff, and we did draw up a mobile phone protocol for kind of as reference for both staff and patients of what was acceptable use. And I am struggling to recall an incident where that has that has been unmanageable. Patients, occasionally do bend the rules a little bit. We did have one person in particular that did call 999 across a night shift, and obviously the operator called us and said this is what's going on. But actually, when you go and have that conversation about mutual expectations, they stopped doing it because they didn't want to be restricted in their mobile phone use. So once that was explained to them, they very quickly went back to using it appropriately.
In terms of mobile phones, whereas in Lotus, because
your patients are all informed,
yes,
so that helps.
All the patients are informed. Also, there is very little restrictive practices. So, except for the trust items that are a contraband. So otherwise, they keep their mobile phones.
Yeah, and it's like we were saying earlier, actually, like kind of established contraband items within the trust and restrictive practice that has an evidence base and that staff can fully explain to patients, they tend to be, I find, much more accepting of those things and much more willing to work with staff. But when there's no obvious rationale for restricting something, that's when I think we start to see a rise in the violence of level and aggression, because there's no reason, in their eyes, there's no reason for them to have that restriction placed on them. Whereas things like observation levels or contraband items on the ward or things, you know, we have things that back that up. We can explain it as part of a treatment program or as part of a care plan, and they're going to work with us on that.
So in your context, on a PICU, they're on a section, they've had their liberty taken away from them, they may be very frustrated and not agree with the rationale behind that. And then on top of that, we're saying, or historically you would tell us stories about you can only order takeaway food at certain times, or you can only access these areas at certain times. You might not be able to have caffeinated coffee between certain times, or even drink Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
And those, I think you're absolutely right to question some of those arbitrary rules that build up, and to use an approach which says it's the care plan determines, the blanket restrictions should be treated with
we do have to be so restrictive to keep everybody safe. We do kind of manage very high risk patients, lots of violence and aggression, and we do have to be so restrictive to ensure that people are safe. That then being restrictive over things that we don't need to be restrictive about just seems like, you know, adding salt to the wound.
To that as well. So now in the common areas next to where we've got the evaluation tablet, so we do have the charger there.
And it might be that we implement all these changes on Ward 1 and our incident forms go through the roof, and then we've got an evidence base to say, well, we do need to restrict these items, but at the moment we don't, so we have to try it. I think we have to.
Okay, so can I thank you both for sharing your experience and expertise on that matter, and we'll watch this space for further good practice on reducing blanket restrictions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.